In pre-Civil War America, there are only very few slave stories, or perhaps none, that can be more compelling than Margaret Garner's. Here are the remarkable words of Levi Coffin, the abolitionist. Perhaps no case that came under my notice while engaged in aiding fugitive slaves attracted more attention and aroused deeper interest and sympathy than the case of Margaret Garner, the slave mother who killed her child rather than see it taken back to slavery. The frantic panic, the intensity, the inevitable "what am I going to do" syndrome, the "I wish I could just disappear" feeling, the tempestuous feeling of a terrible monster forcing its way right through your door. What would you do? These are the only ways the Margaret Garner story can be described. The story of Margaret Garner had advanced the rift between the abolitionists and the defenders of slavery, a rift that in effect led to the Civil War. Welcome to the interesting segment of today's video. Before we continue, kindly encourage us by hitting the like button in front of you. Share with your friends and subscribe to stay put for more interesting contents ahead. Do please stay with us on this one to the very end as we relate to you the ever-memorable Black narrative of the remarkable slave woman, Margaret Garner. Margaret, aka Peggy, a mulatto, was born on the 4th of June, 1834, a house slave to the Gaines family of Maplewood Plantation, Boone County, Kentucky. A house slave was a slave who worked and often lived in the house of the slave owner, performing domestic labor. House slaves performed essentially the same duties as all domestic workers throughout history, such as cooking, cleaning, serving meals, and caring for children. However, their slave status could expose them to more significant abuses, including physical punishments and use as a sexual slave. Working as a house slave for much of her life, Margaret often traveled with her masters and even accompanied them on shopping trips to free territories in Cincinnati, Ohio. Given the situation, there's no telling the humiliating experience Margaret must have been through growing up as a house slave. She may have been the daughter of the plantation owner, John Pollard Gaines. Why? This is usually as female slaves are rampantly raped by their owners, who at the end of the day become pregnant, turning mothers in the process. Rape was a legitimate act in the era, raping black female or male slaves to be specific, so it's not like there was anything anybody could do about it. It was some horrible fate black slaves couldn't help embracing to live on at the time. That apparently was what happened to Margaret's mother, a black female slave. That explains Margaret's mulatto status. John Pollard Gaines, Margaret's supposed father, was a U.S. military and political figure. He was a Whig member of the United States House of Representatives, representing Kentucky from the year 1847 to the year 1849, and he served as governor of the Oregon Territory from the year 1850 to the year 1853, stepping down after a turbulent term in office. He was the owner of Margaret Garner, whose enslavement and sexual assault is the basis for Toni Morrison's prize-winning novel, Beloved. In the year 1849, Margaret got married to Robert Garner, an enslaved man. That was how she took up the name Margaret Garner. In the late of that same year, December to be specific, the plantation and all the people enslaved therein were sold to John Pollard Gaines's younger brother, Archibald K. Gaines. The Garner's first child, Thomas, was born early in 1850. Three of Garner's younger children, Samuel, Mary, and Priscilla, described as mulattoes, were born each 5 to 7 months after a child born to Archibald Gaines and his wife. These light-skinned children were likely the children of Archibald Gaines, the only adult white male at Maplewood. The timing of the pregnancies suggests that the children were each conceived after Gaines's wife had become pregnant and was sexually unavailable to him. The winter of 1856 was a particularly harsh one, harsh enough that the Ohio River froze solid in January, something that only happened every few years. When it did happen, slaves on the Kentucky side of the river would take the opportunity to make their break for freedom across the solid ice. This particular break happened in the latter part of January, the 28th, 1856. A party of 17 belonging to different masters in the same neighborhood made arrangements to escape together. There was snow on the ground and the roads were smooth, so the plan of going to the river on a sled naturally suggested itself. The time fixed for their flight was Sabbath night, and having managed to get a large sled and 2 good horses belonging to one of their masters, the party of 17 crowded into the sled and started on their hazardous journey in the latter part of the night. Robert Garner and his wife, Margaret Garner, who was at the time pregnant, together with family members, along with several other enslaved families, had just escaped and were on their way out and running. running towards just anywhere now. It doesn't have to be a familiar destination, it only has to be a slave-free zone. Robert, with the aid of his cohorts, had not only stolen his enslavers' horses and sleigh, but also his gun. This was about survival. They were going to need it. They drove the horses at full speed, and at daylight reached the river below Covington, opposite Wester Row. They left the sled and horses there, and as quickly as possible crossed the river on foot. It was now broad daylight, and people were beginning to pass about the streets. The fugitives therefore applied the caution of dividing their company so that they might not attract so much notice. The 17 of them had come to an instant resolve to split. Margaret's father and mother-in-law, Simon and Mary, who were also part of the escapees along with the rest of the family, made their way to the house of a man named Elijah Kite, known to be a relative of Margaret's, but whose freedom has been purchased. They had to make several inquiries in order to find Kite's house, which was below Mill Creek, in the lower part of the city. This, however, may have led to their discovery afterwards, as they had apparently been seen by a number of persons on their way to Kite's, and could have been easily traced by pursuers. The other 9 fugitives were more fortunate. They had made their way uptown and found friends who conducted them to safe hiding places where they remained until night. They were put on the Underground Railroad and went safely through to Canada. Kite had quickly gone to Levi Coffin for urgent counsel on how to get the group to safety. Coffin had agreed to help them escape the city and told Kite to take the Garner group further west of the city where many free blacks lived, and they were to wait there until nightfall. Levi Coffin, from October 28, 1798 to September 16, 1877, is a personality we all must know for a second. Coffin was an American abolitionist and prominent conductor of the Underground Railroad. The Underground Railroad was a network of secret routes and safe houses used by enslaved African Americans to escape to freedom in the northern states or Canada during the 19th century. Coffin was born in North Carolina and raised in a Quaker family with strong anti-slavery beliefs. In 1826, he and his wife, Catherine White, moved to Newport, now Fountain City, Indiana, where they opened a general store. The Coffins became actively involved in assisting fugitive slaves and worked tirelessly to aid their escape to freedom. Levi Coffin's home in Newport became known as the Grand Central Station of the Underground Railroad because of its crucial role in helping numerous slaves reach safety. The house was often filled with escaping slaves seeking shelter, food, and assistance on their journey northward. Coffin used his store as a front to conceal his activities and maintained a discreet but efficient system to protect the freedom seekers. Levi Coffin's dedication to the abolitionist cause and his instrumental role in aiding escaping slaves earned him the nickname President of the Underground Railroad. His legacy as an ardent anti-slavery activist and a conductor on the Underground Railroad remains an essential part of American history. This was the man that Elijah Kite had urgently gone to meet to plan his friend's escape. A few reasonable minutes had quite passed after Kite stepped out of the house. No sooner had the fugitives realized that they had been made out and were already surrounded by pursuers whose furious voices they could now hear telling them to own up. They couldn't believe their ears. They ran into frantic panic, short of just anything to do. They had found the Garners barricaded inside Kite's house. Slave catchers, some U.S. Marshals, the master of the fugitives with a posse of men. The door and windows were barred, and those inside refused to give admittance. The fugitives were determined to fight and to die rather than to be taken back to slavery. Margaret, at this point in time, had run amok, pacing from wall to wall, the mother of 4 children who was also heavy at the time. She then declared menacingly that she would kill herself and her children before she would return to bondage. It was clear she meant it. This was more or less a vow. The slave men were armed. They gathered courage and decided that even if it was death, they would not die without a fight. The window was first battered down with a stick of wood, and one of the deputy marshals attempted to enter, but a pistol shot from within by Robert Garner made a flesh wound on his arm and caused him to abandon the attempt. But the pursuers were not going to abort the mission. The gunshots from inside was not going to deter them. They had begun battering down the door with some timber and rushed in. Robert had fired several more shots and wounded one of the officers, but was soon overpowered and dragged out of the house. At this moment, Margaret Garner, her eyes dirtied with the futility of hope and impossibility of freedom, dared to fulfill her word. She had picked up a shovel and with it struck 2 of her children on the head, and they fell blank. Margaret wasn't done yet. In the wink of an eye, she had seized a butcher knife that lay on the table, and with one stroke had slit the throat of her little daughter, Mary, whom she probably loved the best. A heart-wrenching choice. But a mother had to do it. Mary was 2.5 years old at the time of her sudden death. She then attempted to take the life of the other children who were already wounded and to kill herself, but was overpowered and held bound by the pursuers who had just stepped in before she could finish off her thought. The whole party was then arrested and lodged in jail. The party remained in jail for almost a month while the legal dispute continued. The Margaret Garner affair had raised serious attention both nationwide and international. The jail was kept busy all the while with visitors trooping in and out to offer their sympathies. According to Levi Coffin, those who came to speak words of comfort and cheer felt them die upon their lips when they looked into Mrs. Garner's face and marked the unspeakable expression of agony. Her sorrow was beyond the reach of any words of encouragement and consolation, and can be realized in all its fullness only by those who have tasted of a cup equally bitter. Visitors noticed 2 old scars on Margaret's face, but when asked about them, she would only reply, "White man struck me." Others noticed the light complexion of her children and speculated that it was evidence of sexual abuse at the hands of her owner. One of the visitors who tried to console Margaret was Lucy Stone, a remarkably vocal anti-slavery activist who returned to her new home in Cincinnati after completing her speaking tour. While Stone met with Margaret, a rumor started that Stone had attempted to procure a knife for Margaret so she could finish the job if the trial went against her. The slaveholders' attorney, Colonel Chambers, openly accused Stone of this in court. When Stone heard about the accusation, she asked to be allowed to address the court after it adjourned for the day. At that time, speaking with her natural eloquence, Lucy Stone Blackwell, as the court called her, made the following statement to a packed courtroom. "I am only sorry that I was not in when Colonel Chambers said what he did about me, and my giving a knife to Margaret. When I saw that poor fugitive, took her toil-hardened hand in mine, and read in her face deep suffering and an ardent longing for freedom, I could not help bid her be of good cheer. I told her that 1,000 hearts were aching for her, and that they were glad one child of hers was safe with the angels. Her only reply was a look of deep despair, of anguish such as no words can speak. I thought the spirit she manifested was the same as that of our ancestors to whom we had erected the monument at Bunker Hill, the spirit that would rather let us all go back to God than back to slavery. The faded faces of the Negro children tell too plainly to what degradation female slaves must submit. Rather than give her little daughter to that life, she killed it. If in her deep maternal love she felt the impulse to send her child back to God, to save it from coming woe, who shall say she had no right to do so? That desire had its root in the deepest and holiest feelings of our nature, implanted alike in black and white by our common Father. With my own teeth I would tear open my veins and let the earth drink my blood, rather than to wear the chains of slavery. How then could I blame her for wishing her child to find freedom with God and the angels where no chains are? I know not whether this commissioner has children, else I would appeal to him to know how he would feel to have them torn from him. But I feel that he will not disregard the book which says, "Thou shalt not deliver unto his master the servant which is escaped from his master unto thee. He shall dwell with thee, even among you, in that place which he shall choose in one of thy gates, where it liketh him best." There was another visitor of note who also came to see Mrs. Garner and had some memorable conversation with her. P.S. Bassett, the American Baptist. Bassett chronicles meeting with Margaret and her mother-in-law just 2 weeks following the event and was able to have some word. Here's an account of his. "Last Sabbath, after preaching in the city prison, Cincinnati, through the kindness of the deputy sheriff, I was permitted to visit the apartment of that unfortunate woman, concerning whom there has been much excitement during the last 2 weeks. I found her with an infant in her arms only a few months old and observed that it had a large bunch on its forehead. I inquired about the cause of the injury. She then proceeded to give a detailed account of her attempt to kill her children. She said that when the officers and slaveholders came to the house in which they were concealed, she caught a shovel and struck 2 of her children on the head, and then took a knife and cut the throat of the third, and tried to kill the other. That if they had given her time, she would have killed them all. That with regard to herself, she cared but little, but she was unwilling to have her children suffer as she had done. I inquired if she was not excited almost to madness when she committed the act. No, she replied. I was as cool as I am now, and would much rather kill them at once and thus end their sufferings than have them taken back to slavery and be murdered by piecemeal. The two men, he meant to say Robert Garner, Margaret's husband, and Simon Garner, her father-in-law, and the two other children were in another apartment, but her mother-in-law was in the same room. She says she is the mother of 8 children, most of whom have been separated from her, that her husband was once separated from her 25 years, during which time she did not see him, that could she have prevented it, she would never have permitted him to return, as she did not wish him to witness her sufferings, or be exposed to the brutal treatment he would receive. She states that she has been a faithful servant, and in her old age she would not have attempted to obtain her liberty, but as she became feeble and less capable of performing labor, her master became more and more exacting and brutal in his treatment, until she could stand it no longer. That the effort could result only in death at most, she therefore made the attempt. She witnessed the killing of the child, but said she neither encouraged nor discouraged her daughter-in-law, for if under similar circumstances she should probably have done the same. The old woman is from 60 to 70 years of age, has been a professor of religion about 20 years, and speaks with much feeling of the time she shall be delivered from the power of the oppressor and dwell with the Savior, where the wicked cease from troubling and the weary are at rest. The subsequent trial lasted for 2 weeks, after which the judge deliberated another 2 weeks. It was the longest and most complicated case of its kind. A typical fugitive slave hearing would have lasted less than a day. The core issue was whether the Garners would be tried as persons and charged with the murder of their daughter, or tried as property under the fugitive slave law. The defense attorney argued that Ohio's right to protect its citizens should take precedence. The slave catchers and owner argued for the precedence of federal law over the state. During the trial, Margaret and her husband were represented by prominent abolitionist lawyers, including John Jolliffe and Cassius M. Clay, and Lucy Stone, a remarkably vocal anti-slavery activist. The defense argued that Margaret's actions were a direct result of the inhumane institution of slavery, where enslaved individuals had no control over their lives or the well-being of their loved ones. The defense attempted to prove that Margaret Garner had been liberated under a former law covering slaves taken into free states for other work. Her attorney proposed that she be charged with murder so that the case would be tried in a free state, understanding that the governor would later pardon her. The prosecuting attorney argued that the federal fugitive slave law took precedence over state murder charges. Over 1,000 people turned out each day to watch the proceedings, lining the streets outside the courthouse. 500 men were deputized to maintain order in the town. The presiding judge, Pendery, ruled that federal fugitive warrants had supervening authority. Defense attorney John Jolliffe then tried a strategy of arguing that the Fugitive Slave Act violated the guarantee of religious freedom by compelling citizens to participate in evil by returning slaves. Pendery rejected this argument. On the closing day of the trial, the anti-slavery activist Lucy Stone took the stand to defend her earlier conversations with Margaret about whom the prosecution had complained. She spoke about the interracial sexual relationship that underlay part of the case. Margaret Garner's actions were driven by her master's abuse and the well-known abuse slaves faced nationwide. Women were known to practice infanticide to alleviate the burden of slavery from their children. However, in Garner's case, her children faced even more opposition due to their being mulattoes. Mulattoes were seen as a threat as well as a disgrace among the plantation and white families, because the birth of mulatto children highlighted infidelity within the slave-owning families. They reminded the family of a perceived sin and were often beaten or sold. Garner underwent drastic measures to protect her child not only from the cruelty of the institution of slavery, but from the double threat due to the child's mulatto status. But in spite of touching appeals, of eloquent pleadings, the commissioner remanded the fugitives back to slavery. He said that it was not a question of feeling to be decided by the chance current of his sympathies. The law of Kentucky and the United States made it a question of property. Margaret Garner was therefore not immediately tried for murder, but was forced to return to a slave state along with Robert and their youngest child, a daughter of about 9 months old. When Ohio authorities got an extradition warrant for Garner to try her for murder, they were unable to find her for the arrest. Gaines, her owner, kept moving her between cities in Kentucky. Ohio officials missed finding Margaret in Covington by a few hours, missed apprehending her again in Frankfort, and finally caught up with her enslaver in Louisville. only to discover that he had put the enslaved people on a boat headed for his brother's plantation in Arkansas. The Liberator reported that on the 6th of March, 1856, the steamboat Henry Lewis, on which the Garners were being transported, began to sink after colliding with another boat. Margaret Garner and her baby daughter were either thrown overboard during the collision or, according to an alternate account, Garner deliberately jumped overboard after tossing her baby into the river. The baby drowned. It was reported that Margaret expressed frantic joy that her baby had died and that she had tried to drown herself. She and Robert were kept in Arkansas only a short time before being sent to Gaines's family friends in New Orleans as a household servant. The Garners then disappeared from sight. In 1870, a reporter from the Cincinnati Chronicle found Robert Garner and gathered more about his life. Robert and Margaret Garner had worked in New Orleans, and in 1857 were sold to Judge DeWitt Clinton Bonham for plantation labor at Tennessee Landing, Mississippi. Robert said Margaret had died in 1858 of typhoid fever in an epidemic in the valley. He said that before she died, Margaret urged him to never marry again in slavery, but to live in hope of freedom. Margaret Garner's tragic story continues to be remembered as a symbol of the harsh realities of slavery and the lengths to which enslaved individuals were willing to go to gain their freedom. The uniqueness of the event has raised significant attention over the years, inspiring numerous writings and artistry. A notable example amongst them is the Pulitzer Prize award-winning novel, Beloved, 1987, by Toni Morrison, and its subsequent adaptation into a film of the same name starring Oprah Winfrey in 1998. As we bid farewell to this compelling tale, let us take to heart its lessons, vowing to create a world where freedom and dignity are the birthright of all. For in the legacy of Margaret Garner, we find the strength to face the past with honesty, to confront the present with courage, and to shape the future with love and understanding. Don't forget to support our efforts by liking, sharing, and subscribing to keep the channel growing. It's your channel. Thank you for watching.